on his beginning Python workshop series. I'll also be doing 5-minute breaks, usually in the middle of the workshop. This workshop is also recorded and will be shared on the Build on ASEAN2021.com, which is what I have on my screen right now, and our SG Code Campus website as well, over here, right? Via these few links that I'm going to share on to Zoom chat right now. So we try to upload these recordings usually within the 2 days or so after each workshop, so please stay tuned for that. All right, so before we begin the workshop in earnest, we are going to use an application called Visual Studio Code. All right, so I'm not going to go into introducing this application yet, but please do download this application, which I'll share you the link onto Zoom chat right now. Onto Zoom chat now. All right, so please download and install it on your platform, all right, either macOS or Windows, so that you can keep up with whatever we're doing for today's workshop. All right. All right, so let's jump right into it. So first of all, I want to begin by explaining and sort of like giving you guys a walkthrough over AWS Management Console. So in case you guys are unaware, this series of 4 workshops that I'm covering is actually directed towards building websites with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then deploying websites and applications to AWS, building servers with Node.js, and finally connecting your servers with DynamoDB, which is also a database on AWS. So with every single part of the components of our applications involves us deploying to AWS, it's highly relevant for us to explore the AWS Management Console, right, which is used to start, control, and to terminate these services. So for most of you guys who don't have an AWS account to begin with, our good friends on AWS in the session beforehand also explained, we'll be provisioning Sandbox AWS Educate accounts with some credits to all participants of the Build on ASEAN 2021 hackathon. All right, so I believe they will also reach out to you guys soon to allocate these accounts. So without further ado, I'm just going to go straight into demonstrating how you sort of like log into your AWS Educate account, how do you reach your AWS Management Console, right? So if you guys do not have those accounts yet, don't worry, just pay attention to what I'm demonstrating here, all right? And everything is recorded. When you do have your account, you can carry out the steps that I have on that I'm going to demonstrate right now. So if you guys can see whatever I'm doing on my screen right now, you can actually access this link via awseducate.com, right? awseducate.com. So that is basically a shortcut to this page, which you will use as a portal to log into your AWS Educate account, right? So if you already have completed all the sign-up process, what I want you guys to do is to click on the Sign Into AWS Educate button here, okay? So once you have that, you will be logging in with your own credentials. Don't worry, again, don't worry if you don't have an account yet. This is a walkthrough of when you have your account ready, all right? So clicking on Sign In on your AWS Educate portal will bring you to your AWS Educate console. This is just AWS Educate. It's not your AWS Management Console. So if everything goes right, you can see on the top right corner, there's a button that says AWS Accounts, right? So if you click on this, okay, you should be able to see something like this screen. So if your account is new, they will ask you about please click to provision your account and all that. So just follow the process. It will take probably like a good 2 minutes for them to start provisioning. If everything goes well, you should be able to see exactly what I see on my screen right now, okay? So this button is the one that actually leads to the starter account. So I'm going to click on that. So this involves a couple of, like a few steps process. You have to first go to your AWS Educate account, then you have to go to your AWS account tab over here. and you have to come to this workbench that I have on my screen. Okay, so what's important over here, if I can enlarge the screen, is a couple of information over here and the two buttons here. All right. So if what's it called? The following sessions, we're going to use services that are related to AWS, and we're going to have to make use of a couple of account details over here and also the actual console. So if I click on the account details, this is where I see all those credentials where I will need to use to connect to my services via your application when you're developing, right? But don't worry about this. I'll explain more in the future workshops. Right, and then on the right-hand side, this AWS console button is what you guys need to click in order to reach this AWS Management Console. If I click on this, depending on the browser, for my browser Safari, it tends to block my pop-ups, right? So just make sure you are aware of that. If you're on Chrome, I don't think it blocks pop-ups, so I think it's fine. Okay. So this is what you would want to see, all right? If you see this view, you see AWS Management Console, you're here, all right? So this is where you are basically going to use to interact with all services that you have allocated to you on your AWS Management Console, all right? So I'm just going to sort of like explain the interface over here. If you're accessing this management console for the very first time, you won't be able to see the exact look that I have on my screen right now. For example, over here, it shows that I've recently visited the IAM, DeepRacer, Elastic Beanstalk, and all that. That's because I was doing another project. I was doing another work where I was accessing these services using another account, all right? But for you guys, you won't be able to see this part, right? But most importantly is I want to bring your attention to this blue bar at the top, all right? So this blue bar contains basically, there are two buttons and a search bar that I want you guys to pay attention to. The first one is the search bar over here, all right? So this search bar allows you to have access to any the AWS services that you have at your disposal, all right? Or just a keyword away. For example, let's say I'm looking for a service called S3. Don't worry if you don't understand what this service is about. All I have to do is click on this input and search for S3. All right. So if you click on this, you'll be able to navigate to the service that you are trying to reach. All right. And if you ever want to go back to the home screen, all you have to do is just click on this button, top left corner, sorry, the AWS logo in the top left corner. All right. But as you can see, I can actually navigate to different services, and you'll be able to see this search bar at any given point in time. All right. So this search bar is basically your go-to method for you to reach any service. You don't have to always go back to home, then only you can reach another service. You can always jump from one service to another, all right? Another option is this services drop-down over here, okay? This is another way to access your AWS services, but it's basically just a long list of whatever services that AWS has to offer. It's not exactly, it's a little bit more difficult to use, especially when sometimes you can't recall the name of the service off the top of your head, but it does provide a very grand view as to the number of services that AWS has to offer though, right? So nevertheless, the idea here is to navigate to different services on the AWS Management Console. For now, we're not going to touch this console yet, but at least not until we're ready to deploy our websites or servers onto AWS. All right, so this is more just a heads up rather than anything. And obviously, when you guys receive your AWS Educate account, you can rewatch this recording, and it will be at the beginning of the recording. All right, so you don't have to skip too far to find this information. All right, so moving on. I'm going to talk about text editors, right? So first of all, I've asked you guys to download Visual Studio Code. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this. Why do we have to download a separate application, all right, for programming today? So just to reiterate, we're supposed to build web pages, web applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let me start by explaining what are web pages. So web pages are basically just documents on the internet. Whatever you see on your browser here, using Safari, using Chrome, Firefox, or whatever, if you navigate to a website, you're basically just looking at documents, right? So the idea of documents should be familiar to you. Things like Microsoft Word documents, PDF documents, you basically open that file, you receive a Microsoft Word document, you receive a PDF document, and you open it using a certain application, right? So you've seen this many times in your school or work settings. This web pages document, they are written in HTML, right? And they get translated by web browsers like Google Chrome, Safari, and Firefox to basically what you usually see and interact with every day. So when your browser sort of like, requests for this page, hey, this user is trying to view this page, the idea here is that the HTML comes first. Then the HTML will drag along the other files that is required, all right? But most importantly, you get the HTML first, all right? The HTML is the one requesting for additional files after that. So how do you recognize such files? Whether it's HTML, is it PDF, is it a Microsoft Word document? It's simply a file with the .html extension, right? Written and also written in HTML. So what is this HTML extension? If you guys can still see my screen over here, I have a couple of files. There's PNG, there's .mp3, there's .pptx. So the idea of extension is just basically the couple of characters that you have at the end of your file name, right? That basically represents what this file's extension is for. And for HTML, it will be .html, right? And then that brings us to the next question. What is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, all right? And I'm going to explain what this actually means. It's actually the language in which most websites are written. HTML is also what provides content and structure to the web page. The code to make the HTML document visually appealing and positioned correctly is called CSS, right? And it will be covered in the coming Tuesday's workshop, or maybe even today if we have enough time, right? And the word hypertext in HTML means that the document can contain links that allows you to jump to other places in the document or to another document altogether. And that idea should be familiar to you guys, because usually when you go to a website, hey, I'm looking at this, and it says docs. If I click on this, it goes to another document, all right? It goes to another document and you'll be able to see what's happening there. And that's a separate document from what you're looking at over here, usually, all right? Usually. We're not talking about like SPAs and React and all that. The latest HTML version is known as HTML5. All right, they have a whole bunch of new features. We'll cover a bit today, just enough to get you guys started. And the phrase markup language in HTML is a way to basically how we tell computers how text is processed and presented. All right, to accomplish this, HTML uses two things: tags and attributes. All right, so don't worry about this. We'll explain more about this later. So how on earth are we going to write these files, right? How are we going to write HTML? If we write PDF, we have to go download Adobe, I forgot what's the application called, Adobe PDF, right? If you want to edit Microsoft Word documents, you obviously have to download Microsoft Word, all right? But how do you edit HTML files? So it turns out it's actually quite easy for you to edit these files, because you don't actually need like, special dedicated application to edit these files. But it's good to have a nice functioning looking editor that allows you to access all these useful quality of life features so that you can write your code better, all right? And one example that I have over here is Visual Studio Code, which I have on my screen right now. Now you guys can choose any sort of editor that you have or you like. All right, this is a age-old question, age-old argument. People love to argue, hey, my editor is the best, Vim is the best, Mac Vim is the best, right? Emacs or whatever, right? But for the sake of today's workshop and ease of installation, all right, I recommend Visual Studio Code. So if you're new to programming, when you're talking about writing HTML, the same also goes for other language. All you're writing is just literal text, right? Nothing else. If you open your Microsoft Word documents, let's say you open it using a very, very basic text editor, you won't be able to see all those normal document looking structure that you usually see when you open a Microsoft Word document normally, right? You see a whole bunch of tags, symbols and all that, and it's very hard to understand that. But for programming files, let's say HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they are just literal text, nothing else, all right? So that's why it's very easy for you to open and access and basically write without actually needing any specialized software. So with that, I'm going to assume that you guys have downloaded this application, Visual Studio Code. And if you have this application ready, all you have to do is just launch your application using your own way. Either you double click on the application icon, or if you're on Mac, you just look for it in the spotlight. The name is called Visual Studio Code. Right, you should be able to see this, okay? Okay, so we are going to leave this for now. We don't really need this. I need to go to the next session before we even touch this. To start any web project, right? So I've taught a lot of kids, and when I ask them to create websites, and I forgot to mention this to them, and they start to have all these files all over their computer. Some in desktop, some in documents, some in the music folder I've seen, right? So, but most importantly for our web projects over here, we need to create a dedicated folder just for that project, right? If you have 10 projects, you have 10 folders usually, all right? And what I usually do is, let's say on my File Explorer, if you're using Windows, it's called File Explorer. On Macs, it's called Finder. So over here, I've navigated to a certain folder. This should be familiar to you guys. This is your home, basically the root of your user, all right? So over here, I've created a code folder, but it's up to you guys. If this is a temporary sort of endeavor for you guys, maybe you want to put everything onto desktop. That's fine as well, right? So for today's workshop, what I'll do is I'll create a code folder, all right? So place it anywhere you want. And inside here is where I have all my projects, right? But for today's project, what I want you guys to do is to create a new folder and call it, let's say, build on ASEAN, build -on ASEAN 2021. All right, we're doing HTML. Oh, I lost it. Yeah, here. Okay. So up to you guys, if you guys want to follow the way I organize my coding projects. It's completely up to you guys, okay? If you guys want to follow this, all you have to do is go to your user home, all right? And create a folder called code. Inside code, there should be a folder called build on ASEAN 2021, okay? So this will be your project folder. If you're creating, let's say, a project for a to-do app, it will be a to-do app folder, right? That's basically it. So yeah, once you have this folder created, obviously this folder is going to be empty, right? There's nothing in there, okay? But don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. All you need to do is come back to your Visual Studio Code, okay? Come back to your Visual Studio Code. And on the top left corner, depending on your platform, it should look roughly the same. There should be a couple of buttons when you click on these icons over here, the two paper icon, all right? So this is what we call the Explorer, and usually you access this most of the time. You'll be working with this sort of like panel over here to create files, to delete files, to create folders and all that, okay? So what I want you guys to do is you're going to click on Open Folder, okay? Open Folder. And they're going to show you this Explorer where you have to find where is that folder that you want to open, okay? So I'm just going to navigate through my code folder. And it's my build on ASEAN 2021, okay? Click on Open. So the whole Visual Studio Code reloads and you should be able to see the name of the folder on the left-hand side, all right? If you don't see the name of the folder on the left-hand side, you're doing it wrong, okay? It's very crucial that you do this right, because some of the extensions, some of the functionalities that we're going to do in our workshop today is going to highly rely on the fact that you open the folder correctly using Visual Studio Code, okay? So on the left-hand side, you should not see anything at all, right? If you follow my steps, you should not see anything at all. It's blank, right? This basically tells you that you do not have any files in your folder, but that's fine. So what I want you guys to do is we are going to create a file, right? There are a couple of icons over here. You can either just click on the first icon, which is just a paper with a plus icon at the bottom right corner, or you can right click and there should be a whole bunch of options where you can create new file, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to call this index.html. And this is quite crucial. Why am I calling this index.html? I've had kids who created files, and then let's say this is my landing page, the very first page of your website, and then they usually call it home.html, main.html. And that usually didn't work for a lot of reasons, because browsers all over the world, cloud services all over the world, basically assumes that the landing page should be index.html. So you just have to sort of like follow that convention, all right? Index.html. Your logo is not the 5 instead of the lesser larger. Yeah, it's fine. This logo that I have, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. This is basically just my extension to make my Visual Studio Code look pretty and all, okay? But don't worry about this, it's fine. So if you click on the file itself, this is your code editor. You're actually in the editor writing stuff, right? Don't worry about the colors. Don't worry about my block over here showing up, right? It's just a couple of customizations I have on my code editor, okay? So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the tags and attributes of HTML that I mentioned earlier on. So as what I mentioned, HTML uses two things, all right? Tags and attributes. Tags are used to mark up the start of an HTML element, and they're usually enclosed in angled brackets. So what are angled brackets? In mathematics, it should be your lesser than and your larger than symbol, right? So an example of the tag is H1. So let me just create that for you right now. So let me say, let's say I'm going to type this manually. Lesser than, H1, larger than, and type a couple of text in between, hello, lesser than, / H1, right? So this example over here, you can see that there are two tags, basically two structures going on here. So most tags, they actually have what we call opening tag and closed with a closing tag, right? So how do you recognize which is opening, which is closing? It should be pretty obvious that this is opening, right? And the presence of the / is what we call the closing tag, right? So any content that are enclosed within inside any pair of like opening and closing tags basically is what we call they belong to that tag, right? They are inside this tag. They are a child of this tag, right? With this, we have basically established a very simple relationship, which is what we call a parent-child relationship. Who is the parent? The H1 tag is the parent. Who is the child? The contents of the H1 tag, right? And as we basically explore more and more, we we can actually nest more and more tags, right? Basically, H1 can contain more stuff inside, or maybe other stuff can contain H1, right? It's basically a structure where you basically create this relationship where who is the parent, who's the child, or maybe that child is another parent, is also a parent to other child, right? So that's basically it. And these are basically tags, right? And the next example that I want to talk about is ing, right? So let's not dwell on what this means yet. I'm just going to explain what the structure is, right? So this example over here, this example is an example of a self-closing tag, right? Self-closing. What this means is that they don't need a closing tag, as opposed to H1, they need a closing tag, all right? So sometimes tags that do not need self-closing tag will just end with a larger than symbol here. That's, you do not have to go and provide ing like this. You do not have to do so, all right? And then this chunk over here is what we call attributes. Attributes, right? So as you can see, there are two attributes over here. And if you're familiar with Python, as what Mr. YY has given in previous workshops, beginning with Python. So dictionaries also has key and value pairs, right? So this is what's going on as well. The key is this few characters over here, src, is equals to this chunk of string, all right? Same goes with alt, there's a chunk of string going on here. I'm not going to explain what this these two attributes is doing or whatever. It will be covered in the later part, all right? So that's it, all right? And in order for you to quickly create all these tags and all that, you don't actually have to type this lesser than, larger than symbol again and again. All you need to do is, let's say I want to create H1, and press tab on your keyboard. If this is on Visual Studio Code, I'm not sure if any other code editors have this feature, or you have to install something else, some other extra extension to do this. But Visual Studio Code, you have this by default, right? So you don't have to install any extension for this. So as you can see, I started off with just the word H1, and then I press tab at the end of this thing. Please don't move the cursor around and press tab. Make sure the cursor is at the end of that particular tag that you want to expand, right? Hitting on tab, you will basically basically expand this shortcut and craft the whole structure of the opening tag and closing tag. Yes, if you find that enter also works, I think enter you have to wait for the window, the suggestion window to come up before you can hit enter. All right. So obviously that is different for different setups. Okay. So, but most importantly, pressing tab is the universal control. You can definitely get this working with pressing tab. Right. So same with just now ing over here. If you press tab, it will basically create the closing, what's it called, the whole structure, and it also tells you that, hey, there's no closing tag, so you don't need to put closing tag and all that, right? So so in the event if you find yourselves, oh, I kind of forget if this thing needs a closing tag, or if this thing needs is a self-closing tag or anything, please rely on tools like this. That's why we use Visual Studio code editors like this, because it helps in our everyday coding experience. Okay. All right. So the next part I'm going to talk about is how do you create an actual HTML page? Okay. So actually, you don't just go straight in and start writing tags, H1 and all that. Okay. You actually have to create a basic structure to begin with, right? So a basic structure of a HTML page, at the topmost layer, you need to create something what we call like this, doc type HTML, and then close it with like this, okay? you have to at least have this structure, right? So you can see that this is a pain to write every single time. I'm not going to remember exclamation mark, doc type, HTML, whatever, right? So I'll show you a shortcut in a bit, all right, that basically creates all this structure for you so they can get started immediately. But you need to get an idea as to what we're dealing with over here, okay? So you can see I have an opening tag HTML, a couple of extra information. This basically tells the page that, hey, this is HTML, okay? Why do we have to do so? Because a couple of other languages follow the same format. They are using this opening and closing tag structure as well, such as XML, okay? It's very common. So this is basically just then straight up telling the browser, hey, I'm a HTML. Please read me as a HTML file, right? And immediately inside your HTML, there should be two tags, right? Two tags. One is head, right? One is, another one is body, right? So you have head and body inside HTML tag, right? So who is the parent? The HTML tag is the parent. Who is the child? The children. There are two children going on here. One is head, one is body, all right? So what is head, what is body? I'm going to explain in a bit. So the head tag is where all the metadata of the page, where the page goes, right? Sorry, can I disable an annotation? Disable, yeah, thank you. All right, so this is basically the two tags that we need to have inside your HTML tag, all right? So what is this head tag for? As what mentioned, this is where all the metadata for the page goes. What is metadata actually? Metadata is basically just data about data, information about this page. What is this information for? It's mostly stuff meant for search engines. Let's say Google, Yahoo, Bing, DuckDuckGo, or whatever. They usually recognize your page and understand the contents of your page via your metadata, all right, which is all the contents that you're going to put inside your head tag over here, right? Because why? They can't exactly come into your page and then look at your pictures and look at your text like, okay, this is a recipe page, all right? So they wouldn't be able to know. You have to explicitly tell them what is this about. Fill in all those details, or it's like a form, right? You just fill in all those details that they require, that they need, and then they should get the rough representation of what your page is about, and then they'll be able to suggest to any sort of like users who's trying to search for related topics, right? So one of those most popular tags that you're going to see is title, right? Title is one of such metadata, because what title does is when you go to your browser, let's say I go to Chrome, yeah. Okay, so let's see if I go to build on ASEAN.com. Right, as you can see, this section over here, this chunk of text built on ASEAN 2021 with a pipe registrations begin in early June, that chunk of text basically stays here in title, right? That's how you control all this information in your head, right? So title is very popular. You definitely have to have this. If you don't have this, it'll be just like the URL, if I'm not wrong, it will just be the URL of your page. So what is this body for? Body is basically where you should put all the content of your page, right? So what constitutes content? Everything that goes in here should be the ones that are meant for the users to view or interact with, right? So things like your articles, your titles, maybe your forms, your buttons and all that, right? So all these things should go inside body, right? And so another thing that I forgot to mention to you is if you guys are used to Python, you've been doing Python for the past 4 workshops, indentations matter in Python, but not in HTML. You don't have to follow a certain indentation for things to work. For example, I don't have to do this. Let's say I can push everything all to the left. It doesn't matter. HTML doesn't really care about indentations. But of course, it helps visually, right? Because with this kind of structure, it's very hard for you to tell that, oh, head actually belongs in HTML. But with proper indentations, you are able to immediately discern that, oh, my structure has these two children going on inside HTML. Okay, so it's just basically something to help the developer itself. Okay. Annotations. Okay, so annotations, what you're calling annotations is basically just comments, right? If you're on Visual Studio Code, HTML comments are actually quite complicated. If I'm not wrong, let's say if I want to write hello world, if I want to turn this into comments, let's say I don't want this to render or anything, what I do is I just press command / all right, /, or if you're on Windows, it's control /, and it turns it into this, right? It's rather complicated. So for you guys, if you are using Visual Studio Code, this is what helps you guys as well. You don't have to worry about and remembering all this like syntax for comments, right? Just press command / for Macs or control / for Windows, and it turns that particular line or whatever you've selected into a comment. Okay, moving on. So this is the basic structure that you need to have to at least to get started with whatever, at least a page, right? You need to have this structure. You can't just go straight in and like, oh, I need a title, go start writing a title or anything. You can't go straight in and do that. You must have a basic structure. And the developer community knows this about this pain point, because if I have to create this structure again and again, why don't I make my life easier and have this generated automatically? So the easiest way for you to create this structure, let's say I'm going to delete everything. The easiest way to create this structure is I want you guys to type exclamation mark and press tab. Okay, exclamation mark and press tab. So this exclamation mark and press tab, if I'm not wrong, it's I'm not sure if it's available in any other text editor. Again, this is Visual Studio Code. Okay, so it will expand into this whole structure for you. You don't have to do anything. All you need to do is probably just rename, hey, what's the title? You probably want to rename this and get started right away into writing your body tag. Okay, so you don't actually have to change anything here. Obviously, usually if you're writing in English HTML, you'll be just leaving it there, right? But if you're writing in another language, you probably want to research into what do you have to do to couple of these attributes, right? But other than that, it should be straight, good enough for you to get started. Okay. So that's why whatever I've just told you about, hey, doc type HTML and all that, it's an introduction, but you don't have to remember about typing it again and again. Okay. All you need to do again, if you guys missed out the last part, exclamation mark and press tab. Okay, and you can get started. All right, that's our basic construction of HTML page. Now we're moving on to HTML headers. So how do you create HTML headings to your web page? Right. So in order for you to create HTML headings, we have actually seen this tag just now. We can use H1 for this. All right, H1, press tab, and you're going to write some title, maybe title of the page, like this. All right. So in HTML, headings are basically written in the form of H1 up to H6. All right, it only goes up to H6. Usually they only use H1, H2, and H3. Why is that so? As we can, H1 is basically used for the main title of the page, right? Usually when you're on a page, there needs to be a single main title, right? H2 and H3 is usually for when you're writing your article, you have like the subtitles and all that. That's where you use H2 and H3. If you need to use H4 and H5 and H6, that means you're probably doing something wrong, because you usually don't have to touch H4, H5, H6. Very, very rarely, right? So just remember to use H1, H2, and H3. Okay, so I'm just going to go straight into writing H1, H2, H3, H2 of the page, H3 of the page, right? Something like this. So make sure you save your file, all right? For example, on the left-hand side, they will tell you it's unsafe. There's a white dot. Mine is like turquoise or cyan. There's a cyan dot on my file name, all right? Make sure you hit save. Once you do so, you should not see that dot anymore, all right? Now this file is ready, right? It's ready for us to basically experiment, for us to view, but how do we do that? So for you guys, it's best. I know that some of the kids that I've taught before, they usually just double click on a file. Let's see, if you're on Windows, you just double click on a file, opens up a Chrome and everything, and then you can see the file, and then yay, I'm done, right? But it's actually not recommended because of multitude of reasons. A little bit hard for you guys to appreciate if you are starting out with web development. One being your page functionality, okay, your behavior could be limited because of that, right? So what we're going to do over here is we're going to actually make use of VS Code extensions, okay, to actually let us host this website that we're building so that we can properly see what we're building, right? So on your VS Code, if you're using VS Code, please, I hope you're following. On the left-hand side, there are a couple more icons, right? But obviously, I'm not going to explore each and every one of them. I'm going to lead your attention to extension over here, okay? Depending on what you have installed, I don't think you have 5 icons. You have 6 icons. I think for me, I've installed an extra extension. That's why I have the 6 icon over here. So for you guys, you probably have 5, okay? So just look for the icon that has like this 4 squares with the 4th one being detached or anything. So that's basically how they say, oh, it's an extension, all right? So if you click on this, you basically, it's like a shopping cart, except everything is free, okay? So Visual Studio Code has all this extension that allows you to enhance your developer experience just a click away. All you need to do is just obviously search for the extension that you want, or maybe the language that you're developing on, all right? So for starters, for today's what's it called, workshop, we need to view our HTML. We need to view our documents, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to search for an extension called Live Server. Okay, Live Server by Ritwik Day. Okay, 5.6.1. So if you click on that, mine obviously installed. All you need to do is just click on install. All right. After you've installed, there should be some changes to your interface, but I'll show you in a bit. You only need to install one single extension. That's all. Right. If you go back to your Explorer, click on your HTML again. On the bottom right corner, bottom right corner, what happened? Live server. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think mine disappeared for some reasons. Yeah, mine disappeared for some reasons. What you can do over here is Command-Shift-P if you don't see that C button. How to install this server? All right, again, look for Live Server. Look for the extension and click on it and click on install. All right, there should be a button that says install. I think let me uninstall it and then install it again for you guys. I'm going to look for Live Server. Click on this extension, click on install. Okay. So once you do so, going back to your HTML, on the bottom right corner, you should be able to see this small button that says Go Live, right? With like an antenna icon going on over here. You should be able to see that. So make sure you're on the page, and then after that, click on Go Live, right? So clicking on Go Live, they will basically start the server and everything, and they should launch your preferred server browser that you have on your computer. If you're using like Safari, I highly recommend you to try to make sure that you have Chrome and Firefox as well, because as a seasoned web developer, Safari is usually the one creating a lot of troubles, right? They usually have all sorts of weird behavior. And usually you will want to make sure that your Chrome and your Firefox version works first, okay? So for those who don't have the Go Live button, all you need to do is Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P for the ones who are on Windows. Look for Go Live, Live, and there should be an option that says Open with Live Server. If you don't see this again, you just restart the whole VS Code application, right? So going back to your Chrome, if you see this page over here, this is basically the live view of what I have developed over here. As you can see, I have H1 title of the page showing up here, H2 of the page, H3 of the page, okay? Okay, so again, what is this title tag for? Look at this, title tag has the word called document. That's why you see on the tab, there's the word document over here. If I change this to, let's say, demo page, and hit save, you can see that your page gets refreshed immediately, all right? If you're using the live server extension, you will be refreshed immediately, all right? So again, if you are on Safari and you want to use Chrome or Firefox to develop, you can easily switch that. All you need to do is copy this link over here, and obviously go to your proper browser, the browser that you wanted, and just paste on the URL and press enter. All right. So when you're done with the whole development process, you don't want to host the server anymore. You can just click on the this button again, which is now saying port :5500. Okay, for yours probably different, but the idea is that, right? So you just click on that, and then that's it. Your page is dead. All right, it's not connected your page to your development environment anymore. If you want to do this again, just click on the Go Live button on the bottom right corner. Okay. All right. So as you can see, H1, H2, and H3. Let's just go back to our heading tag. H1 looks the biggest, right? Obviously, being the title of the page. Okay. H2 being the slightly smaller one, H3 being the smallest one over here. And obviously, if I just keep on doing this for H4, H5, H6, it will just become smaller and smaller and smaller, probably even smaller than your normal text. But as what I basically recommended just now, please try not to use H4, H5, H6. Usually, it's really good enough for H1, H2, H3. And again, if you're inclined to use H1, H2, H3 because of the font size, please don't. H1, H2, H3 is there for the sake of representing the title of the page, the subtitle of the page, the second subtitle of the page. It is used for those purposes. If you are trying to use it because of like font size, I want to make it smaller or anything, I want to make this bigger font size or anything, we have the language for that, for you to control the font size, okay? Yeah, thanks for the ones who's trying to debug other students' problems. Okay, so the idea here is this, okay? You have your working environment with your live server up and your browser showing you the web page, okay? So for example, over here, let me just create a couple more, H3 tags. Let's say if I save this, you can immediately see this page reloads and shows you the latest updates that you have on your HTML. Okay, and this helps a lot, right? Because you do not want to make one small change on a page and you come back to your Google Chrome or Firefox and hit reload. Okay, you will hit that after you do that for like maybe 20 times. Okay. So now moving on. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention this. For this extension to work, this live server extension to work, you must have the basic structure of HTML. Meaning, you remember just now the part where I put the exclamation mark and press tab where the whole structure expands. You must have that structure in place. If you don't have that, the page doesn't reload automatically for you. Okay, so if you are facing this problem, most likely is your structure being incomplete in the first place. If you use the exclamation mark shortcut and press tab over there, they should work fine. Okay. So now I'm just going to just go through a couple of like most commonly used tags in HTML so that you can get started on like working on your demo project, your MVP, right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete the rest of I'm just going to leave one H1, okay? So the next tag that I'm going to explain is the P tag, right? P, P, okay? So what this P is for is it basically represents paragraph, okay? What we usually do is we usually place all of our regular text, like this long article, every single paragraph goes into each of this tag, right? If you have like 4 paragraphs in your articles, you need 4 P tags, right? So and let's say if you're creating like, let's say a website, and if you're working with your teammates and you're wondering like, oh, okay, I roughly know that I need a couple of articles over here, but obviously your teammates aren't free enough to basically create the article itself, but you roughly know that, okay, I need like, probably like a good 300 words over here. What you can do over here, there's another shortcut which is really, really useful, is you can type lorem. Let's say if I want 100 words, all I need to do is just type lorem 100 and press tab. Okay, lorem. It needs to be lorem. Okay. So so please make sure that you have your whole process of opening your folder at the top before you try all these things out on your live server. Okay. Yeah, Devi, it's recommended to use Visual Studio Code, but if you want to do it on Replit, that's fine as well. Just make sure you know how to save, you know how to download the files, okay? All right, so as you can see, I've demonstrated a feature where they automatically generate a number of words, okay? Again, the shortcut was lorem 100, and this basically generated 100 words for me, okay? And I leave you guys to imagine how would you do it if you want to generate 200 words instead, okay? So this tool is particularly useful for when you're creating websites and you do not know what to put in as of yet, right? Especially when you're like, rushing for time. Hey, I just want a website up right now. I can't be bothered to like, start waiting for the actual like copy of your project or anything. This is how you would do it. Just throw some random text, okay? So for those who are involved in like designs, when you're like developing brochures, posters, you should be quite familiar with this couple of words: lorem ipsum dolor syllabum. Okay. All right. I'm gonna save this, and you should be able to see what's this appearing like this. Okay. So it's almost immediate. You can see this change immediately. All right. Okay. Now the next tag that I'm going to talk about is the span tag. Right. What is the span for? It is used to group inline elements of your document, all right? What are inline documents? Let's say in the middle of your P tag, in your whole article, your whole paragraph, you would want to, let's say, I just want to group this chunk of word together, right? Why is this useful? Maybe you want to like, use your JavaScript, or maybe you use your CSS to do some things to it, make it look nice, make it look colorful, or maybe there's some behavior going on with this couple of words. If you want to do that, you have to group them up using your HTML, right? If not, you won't be able to sort of like grab this few chunks, few words and put whatever design, styles, or behavior onto it, right? So what you can do is you just create span, opening tag, let's say span and press tab, okay? Again, span, make sure your cursor is at the end of the word that you're trying to expand, and hit tab. All right, and all you need to do is just cut this chunk and maybe throw it in here. Okay, that's it. That's how you wrap it. Okay. Obviously, the idea here is you need to have the opening tag and the closing tag, and then that's it. Okay, wrapping a chunk of text. Okay. All right. So, what does this change visually? If you save this, nothing will change. Span doesn't actually do anything visually for your document. It doesn't actually do change like how it looks. It makes it bold or whatever. No, that's not span. Okay. What's your what this thing? How do you make it bold? Instead, you will have to use. Let's see if I'm going to put this thing over here. You will have to use strong instead. Okay, strong. Obviously, strong for make it emphasize. Make it important so that everyone can see this word that you're trying to highlight. Okay, so I'm going to do the same process of like cutting the closing tag and probably just pasting it somewhere. Okay, so I basically group this two words, right? Sapiente, I don't know how to pronounce this. I'll probably butcher it, right? So as you can see, this is bolded on your page right now. And again, this is just what they do by default. That means they will try to bold these two words and then on your screen. And please don't rely on the fact that it bolds, oh, I want it to be bolded. That's why I use strong. Strong exists for the sake of, again, for search engines, so that search engines know that, oh, your article places a strong emphasis on these two words. So these two words probably will define most of what you're trying to do. Okay, so that's how they take all these two words into this strong text into account. They are used to basically tell the Google search bars, search bots and all that, what this page is about, okay? If you're ever going to, like, let's say, oh, I want to make some words bold or anything, please use the next language that I'm supposed to cover in the next workshop, which is CSS, okay? All right, now the next part is obviously the most crucial feature of HTML, because that's what defines HTML. Okay, Vincent, how do you make the long thing into a paragraph? Because mine is single line. You have to go into Visual Studio Code settings. So you can go real quick. Let's say if you look for settings, okay, Command comma or Control comma, you can look for wrap. Yeah, wrap. There should be an option that says editor word wrap, controls how lines should wrap. You can turn this thing on, okay? All right, so the next feature is basically how the main feature of HTML, right? Because in the word HTML itself, hypertext, as what I've explained just now, it basically means that your page is able to navigate to another page, right? There's a functionality where you can click on it and then it basically just navigates to different parts of the same document or to a different document altogether. And in order for you to do so, we have to use a special tag, obviously, and it's called a anchor tag. A anchor tag, right? So this anchor tag over here, as you can see, if I use my shortcut, if I press A and press Tab, it basically expands it automatically to include one extra attribute. You can see this attribute is definitely there whenever you try to expand it using the shortcut, okay? So what this href means is, href basically stands for hyperlink reference, okay? In layman terms, where do you want this link to go to, okay? So if you have a second page or if you have like another website you want to link it to, all you need to do is, let's say I want to link this to buildonasean2021.com. So I'm just going to copy this link over here, come back to this href and make sure to paste it inside your string double quotation marks, okay? Hope you guys know what strings are, okay? As you can see, this is a tag that has both opening and a closing tag. What does this mean? This is basically the tag trying to tell you that, hey, I can contain contents, I can wrap stuff, right? And obviously links, usually you have to wrap maybe a couple of tags, maybe a box or anything, so that that particular box acts as a link where you can click on it and it goes to another page, or it does something, okay? So over here, I'll probably say click to visit build on ASEAN 2021. Okay, so if I save that, you should be able to see this link over here on your page. Okay. Now the color is really dependent on whether you have visited the page before. All right, but obviously you can also control this via CSS. The default behavior of web browsers, they're usually there to like say, hey, if this is like this dark bluish thingy going on with your links, they usually indicate that you have visited this page before. Okay, if this is like, you know, fresh blue, very bluish kind of blue. Let's see, yeah, I put this, yeah. So this link, I've not visited this link before. So that's why this link turned into this neon blue, all right? So this is this ugly blue that you usually see in the 90s websites when usually when you look for like old school websites, this is what you usually see, okay? Okay. That's it. All right, so that's your anchor tag and is used to put links, right? So this is one use case where you can link to an external page, basically a page that is not your page. It is like an external website, not your website. Let's say if you want to link it to your own second page, right? So let's say if I want to create a second page, all I need to do is go to Explorer. Let's say I'm going to create a second file, all right? I can right click and let's say create new file. This time I call it page2.html. I'll show you the significance of this too. Why am I calling this index.html? Why is this page2.html? So if I press enter, there should be a new file, right? And I'm going to do the same old ritual again. Press exclamation mark, press tab. There's a whole chunk of text being generated for me. I'll probably go ahead and change the title tag and say page 2, right? And in the body, I'll probably just say page 2 as well. With a H1 maybe, H1, say page 2. Okay, save this. So on your index.html, if you want to link to your page2.html, you have to change the href content and write, let's say, page2.html. Okay, that's basically it. So if you save this file, and you can see it turns blue again, all right? Because why? I've not visited this file before. I've not visited this link before. So if I come in here and click on this link, it goes to page 2. Okay, that's how you navigate to a second page. And if you go back, you can see now it turns to this this dark bluish color going on here. All right, and if that bothers you, you probably want to explore CSS to change this. All right. So that's how you link to a second page here. So what is this? Now I'm going to explain why do we call this index.html? Why is this page2.html? Index.html indicates that this is your landing page. What is a landing page? Let's say if I go to buildonASEAN2021.com, this is your landing page, right? You don't have to put in // whatever. It's just buildonASEAN2021.com. That's it. And you get this page. This is your landing page. And usually this page is indicated by this file name, index.html. So this is what's happening on our page as well. If we skip this section where it says index.html, I just want to delete everything, leaving just the IP address and some port number. If I press enter here, I should see the exact same page. Why? Because it makes the assumption that you're trying to access the index.html. Okay. So that's why I recommended if you want to build a landing page, please make sure you have your index.html first in place, then build your subsequent pages using other file names, okay? All right. So this is you linking to another page, all right? Yeah, next up we have images, all right? We have images in HTML. So how do we put images on your HTML? So to put images on HTML, you have seen this tag, from the very beginning, where I was trying to demonstrate attributes and tags, we can use the img tag, right? If you type img and then you press tab, it will basically expand into this this looking tag over here with no closing tag. Okay. So you have two attributes going on here, src and alt. All right. So what does this two mean? So I'll try to explain what src means. Okay, src, as you guys would have pieced out by now, src basically means source. Okay, where is the source of this image? So sometimes there are two sources. Sometimes it's from the same folder that you're currently working on, or maybe sometimes it is hosted by someone else. Okay, so let's look at the second option first. How do we link an external image? So let's say if I'm trying to Google for, let's say, yeah, my wallpaper over here, coral reef images. All right. So if I try to open image, let me find open image in a new tab. Yes, this one, right? If you have somewhat of this link, right, that ends with a .jpg, that means this is a link that directly goes to this image. So what you can do is you just copy this whole link, come back into here and paste this link onto the src section, all right? And then if you save this, you should come back to your page and you should be able to see that image itself on your page, right? Now this works if you have an image that's hosted externally, right? And it ends with a .jpg or PNG or whatever extensions that you have for images. But you kind of have to try it around because not all links work. You have to make sure that you test around. If it works, then that's good. If not, you probably have to download the image and put it inside your folder. Now, what you can do next is the second way of putting images onto your web page. First one is like finding an external link. Second one is having the image on the folder itself. So the way to do this is, let's see if I'm just going to drag this image and drag it into, oh no, so where's my join? Yeah, so I have an image over here. Oh, web P. Let me download the image. Do I have an image here? Okay, I have an image here already. Okay, so this image is a PNG image. I'm going to drag this onto my projects. Okay, drag this onto my project folder. So this works if you already have the image, or if you don't, you can just download from any source. Okay, and then you probably want to rename this file, okay, into something shorter. If you don't, you probably have to write a full name. I'll probably call this like, HTML structure.png. Okay. So you know that this is inside your folder, your project folder. All you need to do is come back to here. You're going to change this link, and you're going to just say HTML structure.png. You can see how VS Code automatically suggests you the file name, right? Okay, and then if you hit save, you should load the image directly. Okay. Yeah. Again, don't worry if you're lost. Everything is recorded here, so you can always watch the recording and try it on at your own time, at your own pace, right? So what is this alt attribute over here? Alt attribute is for let's say we view websites like visually. We can see what's happening. We can see this title. We can see this like paragraph and all that. But for some of the unfortunate outside, let's say they are visually impaired, they can't exactly view. They don't exactly have full vision. They can use to see websites and everything. They usually use this technology called screen readers, right? It's an assistive technology where they browse websites and the screen reader technology will just read off the website. Okay, And if your website is a very simple sort of like structure where you have titles, then you have subtitles, you have some paragraph and all that, it's very easy for the screen reader to read, right? And obviously, we don't have that kind of technology where screen readers will be able to determine when it comes across images, they will be able to see, oh, this is the image of coral reefs, right? They can't exactly do that, okay? So alt text over here is what we as a developer has to assist in providing descriptions of what this image is about, okay, to the best of your abilities, of course. So, and this is only for when you're building websites for like, production, you're building for let's say a customer or anything, you want to make sure that everyone can view your website. But if you're building this for hackathon purposes, you just want to get this page up and done really quickly, you can leave this blank or you can just delete this altogether. Okay, no worries on that. Okay, that's images. First few lines. Okay, now moving on to the next tag is how do you create lists in HTML? Okay, so to create lists, you can create either ordered lists or unordered lists. Okay, so what are ordered lists? What are unordered lists? Ordered lists are basically lists that you see online that you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, that kind of list. Okay, or unordered lists are basically just points. Okay, just dots, dots, dots for every single item. So the most striking difference is what I've explained just now between them is that ordered lists are labeled usually with numbers or alphabets, while unordered lists are basically just what we refer as bullets. Okay. Now to create ordered lists, this is your first encounter with you having to pair multiple text together in order to create a single feature. So to create ordered lists, you will need two elements. Okay. First is OL, okay, ordered list. So OL basically stands for ordered list, all right? And you can roughly imagine what unordered list is going to look like, all right? So to create an OL list, all you need to do is just press tab again on this thing, and you should look exactly the same as your usual opening and closing tag, right? Nothing special with this. But what's interesting over here is that you have to pair it with a second type of tag, which is called LI. Okay. LI basically stands for list items. Okay. What this is for is basically it's used to provide, like, let's say, individual items. If you have 3 items, you have to create 3 of this. Okay, like this. All right, you have to create 3 of this, okay? And individually, you have to provide what's the content of the individual items. Let's say I'm going to write item 1, item 2, item 3, okay? So if I save this thing without any changes, just bare bones, OL, and there are 3 list items, save, all right? You should see there's a list at the bottom of my screen. I'm just going to enlarge this a little bit. Item 1, item 2, item 3, okay? 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so this depends on whether you like this ordering, all right? Like, do you like 1, 2, 3? Maybe you don't like that, right? Maybe you like ABC. If you want to do so, all you need to do is come back to your OL, add a new attribute called type, okay? And I was going to explain all this, but yeah, good that VS Code is showing me this this tooltip, this little tooltip going on here. VS Code helps in telling you that you have all these options. It does all these things. Okay, I'm just going to show a couple. By default, they will show numbers. Okay, which you can also provide if you provide the string 1. Okay, if you don't like that, I can also do string, let's say A, lowercase a. Okay, if I do so, you can see the bullets turns into A, B, and C. Okay, so Obviously, if you change this into a letter A, capital letter A, you can see capital letter ABC. This is good if you're writing MCQ maybe, right? And then for Roman numerals, you can put I, and then it turns into Roman numerals. Okay. So this is for ordered lists. There are a couple of options you can go and test around. Visual Studio Code actually helps by providing tooltips like just now. Equal, right? You can see all these options. Okay. I'm going to leave it as maybe I. All right. So that's ordered lists. What about unordered lists? To create unordered lists, it's a very, very similar structure to this. I'll be using UL instead. Okay, UL. And then let's say I'm going to create 3 items. I'm just going to copy this bunch and paste it here. To create 3 items, I will still need the li tag, opening and closing tag. Same thing, no different from the ordered list counterpart. Okay. So over here, if I save my my file over here, immediately my page refreshes and I can see the individual items here. Okay. You can choose to change the bullets, like the bullet designs. I think by default it's a circle. Okay, let me try. Type. Okay, you can use type again and you can switch it to let's see circle. Yeah, okay. Circle turns it into this like old looking circle, hollow, right? And you can change this into squares. Okay. And last one, disk. I'm not sure if this, okay. This is the default one. All right. If you Google online, they should tell you that like experimental features. Some browsers will support it. That they can do triangles as well, but only some browsers can support this. Not every single browser. Okay. And if you see like online, there's like very cool looking bullets and all that. It's very advanced. Okay. So if you're not used to CSS and HTML, I highly suggest you not to explore too deep into like customizing a bullet look, right, styles. Next up is actually quite bland. OL stands for ordered list. UL stands for unordered list. Okay. So the next type that I'm going to explain is div, right? What is div? Sometimes you just want to group things together, either for semantic purposes, like this chunk belongs together, or just for styling purposes, so that you can use maybe CSS or maybe put a behavior using JavaScript. You can use div for this. So what is this div? Div is basically just another tag that doesn't mean anything. It's just a container that allows you to wrap things up. Okay, you can wrap this into a div, or maybe you want to wrap this 2 lists into a div, right? It's basically a container, a free-form container that you can use to wrap anything you want. And being the most sort of like, diverse div doesn't really do anything, but rest assured you are going to use div very, very often, okay? Usually to create, let's say, to create structures, if you want to create, let's say, columns and all that, usually have to use div, okay? Everything else that I've explained just now, they are basically mostly for, let's say, textual content. I have a paragraph, use P. I have a link, use A. That's all. If you want to create actual structure, where you want to divide into sections, this column and that column and all that, like cards and all that, you will have to use div, okay? All right. The next section is where I'm going to explain forms and inputs. Now, forms and inputs is actually huge in HTML because usually when you're dealing with a HTML page, right, it's very common that you will have to receive inputs from the user, right? You will ask for like maybe their name, their age, and all that. It's very, very common. So in order for us to build that functionality, you can't use div, UL, OL, image, and all that because they don't receive input, okay? So that's why this section where I'm going to talk about forms and inputs is very, very important, all right? And it's also decently large, okay? So what are forms for? they make up a large part of web functionalities. So login forms, let's say, whenever you're trying to log into web applications, like your email, like when you're typing in your tweet on Twitter, you texting to your friends on Facebook Messenger, or you're subscribing to this workshop on the registration forms, right? You remember when you go into Build on ASEAN, you were trying to subscribe for workshops, you need to input, you have to go through a form, that's all input, right? So to create such forms, you need a combination of a couple of tabs, right? And it's decently complicated, right? So just bear with me. So the first one is form. In order for you to create form, obviously, I will recommend you to create, obviously, using the form tag first. Form. Okay. So if you press form and then you type form and then you press tab on the word form, it will expand into this structure over here. Okay. This structure is basically your most basic structure for you to deal with to basically create forms. Okay. But for the sake of like simplicity, for you to work with so that you can write JavaScript and all that, what I recommend is delete all these things. Just leave it blank. This is all I need. Okay, I just need you to have a form opening tag and a form closing tag. Okay, so I also know that some developers, when they create forms, they don't actually use the form tag, right? That's actually quite bad, because in order to fully appreciate this, my next workshop coming Tuesday, right? Now I'll explain why this thing is important. This basically groups up all of the inputs, right, into a single form, so that you can work in JavaScript a lot easier, right? So essentially, this is it. If you want to create a form, you have to obviously create a form tag, and then everything else should happen inside this form. Now, next up, we have inputs, right? Obviously, if you have a form, you need to have inputs, right? Because if I ask for your name, you need to provide me some space for me to type in my name, obviously. If I don't have such a space, how am I going to give you my name? So the idea here is, if to create such input, you have to use the input tag, right? And pressing tab on this input, the word input, will create this structure. Div is just generic, is bland, it's just a container. Right? You should be able to see this input tag over here, right? After you type input and then you press tab on it. Again, if I want to demonstrate, input, press tab. You should have this basic structure. Notice how this is a self-closing tag. There's no closing tag per se, right? You just have an input tag. So what is tag? What is this input tag for? As what I've explained, it creates this field so that you can type in stuff, right? So let's save this thing and see how this thing behaves. You can immediately see on the bottom of my page, I get this, like, input field. Okay, I get this input field. Okay. Yeah, I get this input field where I can obviously type in anything I want, right? Hello world. Right, so this text input is like the most basic of inputs, right? It's a single line where you usually use this for things like your username, your name, or your first name, your last name, or maybe I'm asking for your postcode or anything. It's like this very, very short single line kind of input that you want from the user. You will have to use input type text. Okay, input type text. Type text is this type attribute over here with the word text is what controls what this input is going to turn out to be. If you don't do anything, if you just type inputs, press tab, this is what you get by default. It will generate a single line of input for you to use. Now, how do you link this to like whatever? Is this a username? Is this like a password or whatever? Is this for my postcode, right? So that's what the other, what's it called? Other attributes I'm going to introduce is for. Isn't this like the int input? Okay, the input in Python is a little bit different because the way how Python works is that it executes from top to bottom. right? And then whenever it encounters input, the whole execution stops until you give me something. But the world of web is very different. The world of web doesn't execute from top to bottom. It waits for the user to interact with it, okay? So in that way, it's very different from Python. Like let's say Python, you have 4 inputs. First, I ask for your first name, then last name, then your age, then your height. Let's say if you're building a website, I mean, I don't have to follow the order strictly, right? I can fill in my height first, then I can fill in my last name, then first name, right? It really depends on it. Okay, so in that sense, it's a little bit different. Right. So how do you link this into like, whatever field that you want? Let's say this one over here, I need this to be your username, right? If you want this to be your username, what you need to do is you need to pair it with another tag called label, okay, label. So label allows you to basically, obviously, label the inputs, okay? So for starters, let's say I'm going to say username. This is for username. What is this for? Right? You can see that it automatically expanded with a for attribute. Okay. Again, if I type label expand, it comes with a for attribute. Okay. So I'm going to talk about for attribute in a bit. First, I type in what is this username for. If I save this thing directly, let's say I don't even touch anything, you can see that it visually shows me as username, right? Username, and then there's some inputs, right? But I mean, if you're just going to show me some text, might as well I use like, div, p or whatever, h1, right? Might as well I do that, right? But no, I'm going to show you a couple of functionalities. Why are we supposed to use label? So let's look at this. If you label this for over here, let's say I put in the word username. And if I come to my input and I create a new attribute called ID is equals to username, you can see I'm trying to match the word username on label for, and also the ID section username, the string username on the input, right? So if I save this thing, right, obviously nothing will change, okay? You won't be able to see anything going on because it's all happening in the background. But if I click on the word username, you can see how it automatically focuses on the inputs, right? And this is usually quite useful in terms of like accessibility because maybe I want to type on the what's it called, the inputs, but I don't really have to always tap on the input box over here, right? If you do this, you'll be able to pair it with a label so that if you click on the label or you tap on the label, it focuses on your anything that is paired with in this for attribute on the label and the ID on your inputs, all right? Now, another thing that you need to do for this thing to work properly when you're dealing with JavaScript later, you also have to provide an additional attribute called name. That's where you write, what's it called? What is this for? And this will reflect in your JavaScript. Not this two, not for and ID. Name is what goes into JavaScript, okay? So you must make sure that this two is the same, all right? So that they both have this pairing behavior where if you click on the label, it goes to input, that's fine. For and ID must be the same, that's for that behavior. Name is equals to some string that goes into your JavaScript, okay? JavaScript will know what is this for if you label it with name, okay? Right, again, you don't have to care about all these indentations, okay? I can have these 2 lines indented like this for all I care, okay? They all work the same, right? This is HTML, not Python. Python indentation matters, but not in HTML. Okay, so once you have this 2 paired, right, you don't have to actually have label next to input, right? I can create any sort of structure I want. I can create a div, I can create a div put this inside here, and it still works, right? Save this thing, and it still works. It doesn't really matter whether this thing is next to each other or this label is like completely different position. It doesn't really matter, right? So if you click on the username, they should still focus on your input box over here. That's how they pair their behavior together, using the for string, the for attribute and the ID attribute on your input and label. All right, so that's one. Next up, we have the next input, which is password. All right. So you usually notice when you type passwords, they usually appear as like, little dots. All right. So make sure you know how to do that, because when you're typing, let's say, oh, I'm creating this login form, right? And if you click on this form, and if they fill in their password and their username, you must make sure to be able to sort of like obscure whatever they're typing on their password field. And don't put text here as well, right? That's quite bad. Make sure you try to put in password. Password has a functionality where they try to obscure whatever you're typing over here. So over here, this is password here. I can type a whole bunch and it appears as dots, right? So same thing, I'm just going to do the same process where I put a label as well. Put a label. Instead of for username, this obviously will be for password, right? And then over here, I'll probably write ID is equals to password. Name is equals to password. Okay. Oh, this needs to change to password. Okay. So we have a structure. That label is automatically paired to the correct input. All right. This username label is paired to this input. This password label is paired to this password input. All right. So they have this pairing going on also because of this for and ID. All right. Make sure you have your name as well, because if you don't have this, JavaScript won't know what this thing is for. Right. And so you can see, there's a pattern going on here. As you can see, my for uses the same string, username, ID username, name also username, right? This is a very common pattern. If you use a single name for this particular label input, it's quite common to use the same name as well for name, ID, and for. Same goes for password. Password, for, ID, name. Name is basically how JavaScript recognizes your what's it called? Your input, right? So don't worry about what that means, because you need a way for you to tell, hey, when I'm programming when I'm writing my program, I need to be able to grab all these values and I need a label on them, right? Because if you give me this whole bunch of string, let's say Eric 90, I mean, I wouldn't know if this is your password, if this is your username. There needs to be a label on top of it. So this is what these things are for, right? Make sure you have those, okay? Nolan, are you going to show us how to connect DB? Yes, in the coming workshops. This is the first workshop of that series. Connecting it to DB will be the 4th workshop. Okay, so next up we have the next input, which is not the input tag anymore, right? Which is the text area tag. This is a special case. This is special. Why is this special? Text area is actually meant for when you are creating. You see this block over here? What is this for? Usually when you're writing, let's say you're in dress, or maybe you're required to write comments, or you write your bio, your description, or anything, you need a whole bunch of space, right? And one line is not going to do it, okay? So that's why you have to use text area, okay? I know this is slightly counterintuitive. Why can't I stick with input, right? But that's the way it is. The text area is used to create input blocks like this, okay? As you can see, you can set default columns, default rows, and all that. And not just that, the user can resize. Okay, they can resize this input. Okay. So same thing. Okay, all the attributes are the same. You can still put your label here. Okay. Your for needs to match your ID. Maybe this thing is supposed to be like for your description, right? Or maybe address. I think address looks fine. Address, right? So for over here needs to match that address. So I'll probably say here, this is your address, right? Right? And this name, again, this is for JavaScript. So the JavaScript knows what this is for, right? So usually you'll follow the same labeling as what you have for and ID, okay? Save. Address. Okay, you can see how when I click on the address label, it focuses on the inputs, right? Okay, so yeah. So that's basically the major inputs that you're going to use for you to create forms. There are a lot more inputs out there. Like let's say you can input a date, you can input a time, you can input let's say your phone number and all that, or maybe there's like a way for you to select a number from like a range. Let's say from 0 to 10. How satisfied are you with this call or something like that, right? So usually it's pretty common for you to do so. Those involves other inputs as well. And for those purposes, I highly implore you to look it up and try to experiment around and implement if it works the way you want. Text area is used to create blocks of input like this. Instead of just one liner, you can create a single block like this. You can control how many columns you want it to be, how many rows you want it to be using these few attributes, columns and rows. HTML cares about spaces. No, it does not. You can choose not to indent, right? But obviously over here, if you don't put spaces, right, it's gonna look ugly. Okay. Yeah. If you don't put spaces, it's gonna look ugly. So try to put spaces whenever you see like different attributes. Please try to separate them with spaces. Where happens and where does the input go? That's for JavaScript in the next workshop. Validation of the input. Yeah, that one is JavaScript as well, which is pretty high level. You probably have the import libraries for that. Oh yeah, Chami, your comment about putting a placeholder. Yes. So placeholder is a very common feature for forms as well, especially when you're like over here, you probably want to say, what's your recommended input, right? Over here, you probably say on your inputs, you can put a new attribute, placeholder is equals to, then you type what you want to display as like a hint, right? So maybe like e.g. then Eric, like this. Save. You can see that it shows up in your input, but when you start typing, it disappears, right? So that usually serves as like a hint, nothing more than just visually, right? It doesn't really affect the functionality of the inputs, right? Difference between name and ID attributes in the text area. Okay, ID in the input, right? On input is for you to pair with a label. ID is for you to pair with a label for, all right? Name is what goes to JavaScript. So the JavaScript knows what this thing is for, okay? Okay, so yeah, so that's forms. So that's basically you just crafting your form, all right, so that you can create a structure. But obviously, this form doesn't do anything yet. There's nothing about like typing in your username, typing your password, typing your address, and then press enter, it should save or anything. No, it doesn't have anything yet. It's a simple form that doesn't go anywhere other than just providing you with those inputs for you to enter, all right? Now, usually when you're dealing with forms, right, usually want to like deal with like, hey, I want to submit, right? It's very common for you to say, I fill in my form, now I want to submit. Traditionally, they will use button, right? Submit button or anything. But for your level, if you're beginner, or if you want to follow this workshop, what I recommend is you can just create a div. Okay, remember div, which is just a very generic container that doesn't do anything, doesn't mean anything. Over here, you can just write maybe submit, right? So technically, this is just a text. Okay, doesn't do anything yet. It's just a submit. Obviously, when you click on it, it's just a text. But what we can do later, when we're dealing with JavaScript, we can add a behavior onto this particular div itself, so that when you click on this, you will grab all these values, then you will do whatever you need to do. Okay. All right. Okay. I think that's about it. The rest of the content should be CSS. I think we don't really have enough time for me to cover most of CSS for today, right? So I think I'll end today. Roshan, what about input type submits? Yes, this is what I was talking about. You can create a button where you click on submit and anything. It's an old behavior. You remember when you create your form, there's an action and everything. It's for old school behavior where action that submit functionality will refer to the action, what's it called, field, and then you will go and submit the form over there. And it's pretty high level and complicated in the sense that you need to have a lot of things set up for you to have that kind of functionality. And usually, if you are starting out, it's a little bit difficult for me to explain all those parts. What I recommend is just forget about the action, forget about input type submit and all that. Just create a div that says submit. Then you'll style it to look like a button. It's not exactly a button, but it looks like one. And you can use JavaScript to add behaviors to this button so that it will grab all these values, then do with whatever you need to do. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's less rigid. Yes. All right. So yes, that is my session for today. With that, I'm going to pass it to Danny or Valerie.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks so much, Eric, for the session today. Maybe let me just share my screen on the upcoming sessions as well.